Hey everybody, welcome back to another M365.video SharePoint short. I'm David Warner. In this part 2 video of chaining multiple library components, we're going to focus on a demo of how to set up and configure multiple chained library components. And then we're going to see how we can connect a web part to the primary library component to consume all the functionality within all of the chained multiple library components. Let's begin with just a quick review of what it is that we covered in part 1 of this video series. The concept we have is a collection of icons spread across multiple library components. Ideally, though, we would not want to connect our web part to all 3 of these library components. So we want one library component that acts as the middleman, in this case, the SVG Icon Broker library component. We will be able to connect our web parts and extensions to this middleman Icon Broker library component, which will then have access to all the icons that live within the collection of icon library components. So let's jump into the demo and see how we can set this architecture up. We're going to begin by creating a collection library component first. Then we'll create an Icon Broker component to consume the icon collection library component, and then we'll create a web part to connect to the Icon Broker library component. So as mentioned, we'll start with an actual icon collection library component. What I have here is a library component that I've created that includes a collection of icons. So if we open up our source files, we see I've created a folder here with another folder called SVG that includes a collection of icons. Now we'll go ahead and open up the primary TypeScript file, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the function that will be responsible for returning our SVG. It's called return SVG URL. It simply takes an icon name argument, which will then look and find the icon in the icons SVG folder that matches the request. And then it will simply return the actual URL of that icon. Now this is a fairly simplistic function. So now all that's left for us to do is to prepare this library component to be consumed and available to our broker library component. To do that, we simply need to execute our npm link command. This will create a symlink in our global node modules folder, giving us access to this particular library component. Now that it's complete, we can see that it's made a connection from our global node modules folder here into the location of our library component here, ready to be consumed by our broker library component. So now let's jump over into a demo of setting up our broker library component to connect to this exact SVG collection 1 library component. So here we have a broker library component that I've created that will allow us to connect to the SVG collection 1 library component that we just built. To create the connection, we simply need to execute our npm link command, but provide the name of the collection 1 library component we just built. What this will do is we'll create a connection from our local node modules folder in our broker library component to the library component we had just built for the collection 1 SVG files. This step is really no different than if we had wanted to connect a web part or an extension directly to our SVG collection 1 library component. We simply decided to create a middleman library component, in this case our SVG broker library component, which will then be used by our web part or extension. This allows us to have one contact point for our web parts and our extensions that can connect to multiple collection library components of SVG files. So now that we've created the npm link directly to our SVG collection 1 library component, we need to go into our package file and we need to go ahead and add that as a dependency. So we'll go ahead and put that there. There's the name of our SVG collection 1 library component and its version. We'll go ahead and save that file and close it. Now let's go ahead and open the primary TypeScript file for this SVG broker library component and take a look at what's necessary to connect to that collection 1 library component that contains our SVGs. The first thing we needed to do was to import our SVG collection 1 library component. We accomplished this with the import statement here at the top, and it's simply using the name that was created by the symlink, which in this case was our SVG collection 1 library component project name, and giving it whatever we'd like to identify as its name here, import star as SVG collection 1 from the name of our library component. I then created a function here called return SVG collection. Now this function accepts two parameters. The first is the name of the icon that we would like to request. The second is the name of the collection that we would like to request the icon from. We then use a switch statement to identify which collection the particular icon belongs to based on the collection name parameter. Now, of course, in this demo, we only have one SVG collection library component we're using, but you can see how we could add additional SVG collection library components in the future. And then for each additional library component, we would create another case statement. Now, in each of these case statements, we're creating an instance, which is a connection to our SVG collection, in this case, our SVG collection 1 library component that we imported here at the top. We instantiate it using the SVG collection library function, and then we return a request of that SVG right here. The return SVG URL function resides within our library component, our SVG collection 1 library component, and we pass the icon name to request that particular icon. If we were to create another collection 2 library component, for example, we would simply just need to create another import statement for that particular library component. And then we would replicate the case statement functionality found here, connecting to that collection 2 library component. So now the functionality for our broker library component is ready to go, but we need to make the npm link command on this library component so it's available to our web partner extension. To do that, we simply execute the npm link command just like we did for our collection 1 library component. We come over to the command prompt and we simply type npm link. But we see that we received an error referencing our collection 1 library component that was added to our packages.json. So this is a simple fix. All we need to do is go into our package.json and simply remove temporarily our reference to our collection 1 library component. Then we'll come back in and we'll perform the npm link again. And now we can see that our npm link was successful. So we can simply go back into our dependencies and add back in our connection to our collection 1 library component and save. Now I wanted to call out that we could have avoided this error altogether if we had executed the npm link command immediately following the creation of our broker library component. What I had done though is I included a reference to the collection 1 library component in our package.json and created the functionality and then executed the npm link because I wanted to show you, in case you ran into this error yourself, how to fix it. Now it's also important to note that when we executed the npm link command to add a symlink for this broker library component to our global node modules folder, it created some errors over here. That's because whenever you create or execute an npm link command or do an npm install, it removes any existing symlinks from your local node modules folder. No need to worry though, the fix for this is super easy. We simply just need to re-execute the npm link command that connects us back to our SVG collection 1 library component. So you simply type npm link, provide the name of our collection 1 library component package, and execute. You'll notice when it's completed, it added it down to our local node modules and the errors went away. So now that we've created the functionality for our broker library component and covered any potential gotchas you may experience in executing additional npm link or npm install commands, let's jump over into a web part and see how we can consume the functionality from this broker library component. So now for this last part of the demo, we're in a web part that I've created to connect to and consume the broker functionality. Of course, that library component connects to my SVG collection 1 library component to actually be given the SVG file that I would like to request. The first thing we need to do to prepare our web part to connect to that broker library component is to execute the npm link command, providing the name of the broker library component. So we'll go ahead into our command prompt and we'll type npm link. We'll provide the name of our SVG broker library component and execute. We see that that connection has been made, and so now we need to go into our package.json for our web part and add the reference in our dependency section for our broker library component. Go ahead and save and close. Now let's examine the code that we've added to our web part to consume the functionality within our broker library component. We'll go ahead and open our web part TypeScript file, and we can see that we simply imported our broker library component just as we had imported the collection library component into the broker library component. The functionality is no different in how we do that. We then created an instance for our broker library component functionality, and then we created a variable here that connects to our return SVG collection method within our broker library component. Now we know that behind the scenes, this is actually connecting to our collection 1 library component to return the URL for our handshake icon inside of the SVG collection 1 library component. Now we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this demo video on how to chain multiple library components. The concept though is really the same whether you're connecting a web part to one library component or you're connecting a web part to a library component which then connects to additional library components. The connections you make to your library components all rely on that npm link symlink creation. It doesn't matter if it's a web part or another library component, the execution of that npm link is the critical step. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and be sure to subscribe in YouTube to get alerts for all my future videos.